Hello. I'm studying game development with you guys. In this video, we will learn how to get input from Unreal Engine. The basic logic of a game is to receive input from the player through an input device, interact with the game, and return the game's response to an output device. That's why, in order to make a game with Unreal Engine, you need to know how to implement a feature that takes basic input from the user. There are two main types of inputs in Unreal Engine. These are action input and axis input. Action input refers to an input that is simply pressed and released, such as pressing a mouse button, spacebar, or E key, such as when jumping, attacking, or interacting. An axis input means input with continuous values such as movement or mouse coordinates. To receive input from Unreal Engine, you first add an axis or action and give it a name. And it adds a keystroke to operate with that name. This process is called mapping. After that, the class implements a function that takes input and operates, and connects this function to the input mapping. This process is called binding. In short, to receive input from Unreal Engine, it must go through a process called mapping and binding. First, launch Unreal Engine and create a project in C++ type with starter content. Now, let's implement the input as described above. First we need to add a mapping. Select Edit, Project Settings from the top menu bar to open the Project Settings window. And in the Engine section select Input. And if you look in the Bindings section, you can see Action Mapping and Axis Mapping items. Here, add a mapping named Move Forward to the Axis Mapping and insert the W and S keys. And if the W key is going forward, the S key is going backwards, so we set the scale to -1. Next, add a move right, map the A and D keys, and set the A's scale to -1. Finally, add grow to the action mapping and map the space bar. After adding the mapping, you need to implement the function and bind the function you created with the input mapping. Close the Project Settings window and select Tools. New C++ class to open the Add C++ class window. Select Pawn as the parent class and create a class. Pawns are objects in Unreal Engine that AI or players can manipulate. After class creation, add Move Forward, Move Right, Start Growing, Stop Growing functions in the header file. And as member variables, declare current velocity of F vector type, B growing of bool type, and our visible component of uScene component pointer type. Our visible component attaches a property macro with an edit anywhere specifier that can be modified from anywhere. Then, in the constructor of the source file, create a scene component in the root component and our visible component, and put it in, and attach our visible component to the root component. And it implements the move forward function and the move right function. These two functions implement the code to create a movement direction vector by putting the input value into current velocity. Next, write code to implement the start growing and stop growing functions and replace the value of the B growing variable. Now that we've implemented the feature, it's time to bind this feature to our input mappings. Go to the Setup Player Input Component function. To bind the axis mapping, use the bind axis function of input component. Action mapping can be done using the bind action function. In the action mapping binding, you can determine which input the function will operate on through input event. You can set various conditions, such as when to press, when to release, when to press twice. We bind the start growing function to be called when the key is pressed and the stop growing function to be called when the key is released. After that, go to the tick function and write the code that resizes the actor according to the state of the B growing variable. And moves the actor's position with the current velocity variable. After writing all the code, save it and return to the editor to compile it by pressing the Ctrl, Alt, F11 shortcut. Next, create a blueprint by finding the MyPawn class in the content browser, right-clicking on it and selecting Create Blueprint Class based on MyPawn. When the blueprint is created and the blueprint editor opens, select our visible component in the Components panel and click the Add button to add a sphere under it. And below the root component add a camera. Adjusts the position. After editing the blueprint, compile and save the blueprint and close the blueprint editor. Next, it's time to make our pawns usable in games. Find the Game Mode base class, right-click on it and create a blueprint class again. After the blueprint editor opens, change the default pawn class to the BP MyPawn we created. Then compile and save the blueprint and close the blueprint editor. Next, open the World Settings panel by clicking the Settings button at the far right of the main toolbar and then clicking World Settings. And here we replace the game mode with the one we made. When you're done, play the game and test it out, and you'll see the sphere move with the move key and grow and shrink when you press and release the space key. In this video, you learned how to get input from a player in Unreal Engine. This video was produced with the donate and watching of the viewers. It was Vers Game Development YouTube. Thank you.